All right. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Oh, hang on here. Welcome back. Why am I still seeing Sue? Welcome back. There we go. We have a program change from our original program, or from the fifth or sixth iteration of the original program. It's all kind of a blur. But next up, we are going to hear from Sara Quinn about what she's learned in her iTrack research about what makes images worth publishing and sharing. And just to give you a heads up on the rest of the day, after Sara, we will hear from Stephanie Sinclair, who is a Canon Explorer of Light, who's done work on the treatment of girls around the room and the impact that photography can have. Then, and after that, is another set of breakouts from you to choose from. This time, Life as a Freelancer with David Bowman from ASMP, How Lenses Really Work from Jillian Bell at Tamron, and an advanced Lightroom session. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with Alexandra Garcia of the New York Times multimedia team, who works on their new show, The Weekly, and has just recovered from COVID-19. Just a reminder that all of these sessions will be recorded, and you'll be able to find them on the schedule page. And a shout out I forgot this morning to Jenny Pinkley, who is running all the social media stuff out there today. So thank you, Jen. So now I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Sara Quinn. Sara and I had side-by-side offices when we worked at the Poynter Institute, and I missed her when I left. And so I'm thrilled that she decided to come back to the U this year and teach, so that we are back to working together. Sara has a deep background in news design and photography. She's the recent past president of the Society for News Design. And she's done quite a bit of research using eye tracking to understand how people read the news. And recently, she's specifically been studying photojournalism and is getting ready to launch a new research project around photography. So I will let her tell you all about it.
Okay.
Sara.
Okay, so I'm really glad to be speaking to you guys. I wish I could see you in person. But the timing of this is really good, because I did a study for NPPA in 2015 that looked at the value of photojournalism and what people understood and remembered, what they wanted to share, what they valued in the age of Instagram, kind of like what was the value of photojournalism. And NPPA reached out to me again this year, and Akili Ramses and Andrew Stanfill and the leadership and I were really excited. We just got a grant from the Reynolds Foundation, Reynolds Journalism Institute, to do another round of study. So we are going to start that in June. And so what I'd like to do is share with you what we learned from the last bit of study and kind of see what you would like to know as we go forward. So I'm going to share my screen here. And just so you know, eye tracking is a part of this study. I don't know how many of you are familiar with eye tracking, but I'd like to talk just a little bit about like what we know about how people read and swipe and what they look at, and then specifically what we know about photojournalism. So over the years, when I was with Poynter for more than 11 years, we worked on a number of studies to look at how people read in print and online in different formats, how they looked at mobile. And so there were a number of major studies, and 3 of those 6 I conducted. A lot of times we were looking at how deeply someone read into a story, if they looked at photographs with the story. And we used a variety of tools, including eye tracking gear, both mobile and something that is mounted to the screen. And we're able to see at any given time what somebody is looking at. And so we call these eye stops. We're able to see, you know, did their eyes land on that photograph? How many seconds did they spend looking at that? Did they read the caption? And we take a look at this in video form. So I'm hoping these videos actually work here. But I want to just show you a little bit of what this looks like. I'm able to see gestures. I'm able to hear what people say about what they're reading. I've created a variety of interactive maps, interactive apps, and stories. And then we study exactly what they've looked at. So this eye tracking research, I'm just going to give you maybe 3 or 4 of our main findings, and then I'm going to jump right into photo. So what we found is that when people pick up a magazine or a newspaper or log on to a screen or their phone, the people, their eyes are drawn first to the largest image or headline. So readers are looking for hierarchy, and they tend to want to know that someone has made that choice for them. So it's important that we as journalists, have a real interest in what people are looking at. So they're taking a look at the largest image, followed by the largest headline, maybe inverse order. When it comes to documentary photographs, in my first study, I found that people are really interested in people, places, and things in real time. So something that is happening and captured in a still image gets more attention than a static or a posed photograph. And oftentimes, we could have said that. We probably inferred that. But there's something about research where we look at hundreds of people looking at images. We're able to support that. We found that faces attracted a lot of attention in photographs. We found that people read a higher volume of text online than in print, regardless of the length of the story. And back in 2007, that was kind of surprising to us, but it holds true. And we found that alternative story forms attract a lot of attention. So something like a Q&A, a short list, a timeline, a breakout box, a map, in addition to longer form, help people to understand and remember what they've read. So those are just 4 of approximately 25 major findings in some of these research projects. But I want to tell you that in 2014, NPPA came to me, and at the time it was Mark Dolan, and they said, what can you tell me about photojournalism from Poynter's eye track research? And I knew that there were a few things that we could say, but I wanted to be able to say so much more. So we could say from earlier studies, documentary photographs get more attention than static or posed photographs. Faces attracted a lot of attention, and they were often the first thing looked at in a photograph. Mugshots are kind of informational. They get only a fleeting glance unless there's strong supporting information. But still, it's important to know, male or female, approximate age, that type of thing. So informational. But it is the photographs of real people doing things in real time that get much more attention. So we knew that, but we said, okay, well, what can we look at now? What can we say that we can actually put in terms of data? So in the age of Instagram, what makes a photograph worth publishing? And at the time that we did this, you'll probably remember that a lot of news organizations, the Chicago Sun-Times at that point, had a number of staffing changes and some pretty disheartening things that changed the number of photographers on the street and editors in the newsroom. So we decided that we would take a look at this in a more concerted way. So this is 2014, 2015. And we wanted to have, exploratory research to start the conversation about news photography. And we're ready to go a lot further with this. But at the time, we published 4 different stories and presented this information all over the world. And it's still up on the NPPA site. And I have slideshows and things that I often give out to people who want to talk about this in newsrooms and at universities, at nonprofits. So there's some good information there. And the questions we had at that time were, how discerning are people who look at journalistic photographs? What do they value? What do they remember? Do they trust what they see? These are all still pretty big questions. What makes them want to share an image? Does quality matter? And of course, the big question here is, what is quality? And I'll tell you that from a research perspective, I wanted to get people talking about photographs, people who were not within the media business, people who we recruited from a variety of ages and backgrounds and educational standing to start to talk about photography. So we gathered almost 70 people in a variety of age groups, and we asked them to talk about photographs. We watched them as they looked at photographs that came up randomly on a screen. And then we analyzed the way they looked at 200 photographs. I had eye tracking equipment to see exactly how long they looked at an image, what they looked at, if there was an order, if they read captions. I wanted to collect data that showed not just what they would say about it, but actually the amount of time that they spent looking at things. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about here today. So we ended up, and I hope this little video is working, using eye tracking equipment so that when a photograph came up on the screen, I could see how much they looked at the image, what they concentrated on, if they read the caption, what length of time they spent on an image. I asked them how they would rate the quality of this photograph, and I'll talk to you in a minute just about quality, and then the likelihood that they might share that photograph. So this was data that I was able to collect for each one of the participants. When we crunched the data, we ended up looking at 52 people and that particular data. It was in May of 2014. About half of them were female, half were male. We looked at two distinct age groups. One group that is commonly called a digital native, someone who's born into a digital world, and someone who is an older group who, they were born before a lot of digital material was created. And then people took part in 5 elements of testing during an hour-long session with selected photographs. So I had curated 100 photographs taken by professional photojournalists within a 60-day time frame, 100 images that had been contributed by the public. We commonly would say user-generated content, or UGC. All of the photographs had been published in on news sites or in news printed publications. And I set up a website so that these images would come up randomly and people would look at as many of the photographs as they wanted to for as long as they wanted to within this hour-long session. And people didn't know how long they would be spending with this, so we were able to see, pretty roughly what they would look at. And I wanted to see, does everyone just click through very rapidly? Do some people spend more time on images than others? And that's what the data was comprised of. So if you guys have any questions as I'm going through this, type them in, or you could probably ask Regina, wave at Regina or someone there and they can ask them of me. I'd be happy to talk to you about this more.
Yeah, either hit the chat or the Q&A and we'll get the questions to Sara.
So again, every one of these images had been published by news organizations. And I recorded the eye movements to see what the subjects looked at any given time. There was a little, it was actually invisible, but there was a little box underneath that focused on the pupil of the eye. And it ended up giving me a little video so I could see exactly where the eye landed. Now here I've outlined it so that you can see roughly where the gaze was, but all of this was invisible. And this was the eye tracking portion of the testing. There was a little infrared camera that actually, as they were looking at it, was not even visible. This is something that we lit up so that you could see it. So our eye tracking gear created a video that revealed the gaze of the eye. And so I had dozens of people looking at different images, including this one, and I wanted to see what they looked at first. And when this first popped up on the screen, at this point, I can almost guess like where your eyes would go, you know, to the women's faces, perhaps to the way that they're interacting there.
Sarah, David
Yeah.
has a question on how much instruction you gave to the people before they looked at the photos.
Okay, great question. So everyone in a research setting gets exactly the same script. And the script said, I'd like to have you look through a series of photographs for as long as you want to, or until we ask you to stop, whichever comes first. And they said, well, what are you going to be interested in? And I would say, this is the screen, this is the testing screen. Images will pop up here. I'd like you to rate the quality of this photograph. And to the person, every single person said, what do you mean by quality? And as any good researcher would do, I just shrugged my shoulders because I was not going to say to them anything about quality. And they all said, oh, you want me to talk about quality? And I would just shrug my shoulders. So that was exactly the script that they were given. They knew that they would spend as much as 90 minutes with us. We ended up recording an hour, but they thought that they might even be there longer. So we didn't put any sort of restriction on it. And then on a scale of 1 to 5, if the likelihood that they might share this photograph. And by sharing, we did say that could mean on social media. That could also mean like, hey, George, you need to come see this photograph. It could be calling someone across the room. It could be emailing it. So that was the instruction. So they were asked to rate the quality. That was the second part of the testing. The likelihood that they might share. And then another part of this was to take a look at a separate grouping of photographs, and it was called the Presumption of Source, to ask whether or not the photographs that they saw in this, in 4 different series had been taken by a professional photojournalist or not. And so here are some examples. There were different events that had been covered by news organizations and with social media, like an event in Manchester, England, where the Queen went out to visit this industrial area. And so I think we had 20 photographs in each of 4 different news events. And photographs would come up and I would just say, was this photograph taken by a professional or not? And if so, or if not, why? So I recorded everything that people would say. The other events were a Bollywood event in Florida, one of the horse racing events, and I can't remember what the other event was. But I would say, if people would look at the top left photograph and they would say, yeah, that was taken by a professional, I would ask them why and record what they'd said. And they might have said, oh, well, who else would have gotten to be that close to the Queen? Or they might have said, things that were surprising that, I didn't even expect for them to say, like, well, it's such a sweet moment. But I wanted them to just, in their own words, tell me about the photograph. The photograph on the top right, most people, all people said, oh, that's not a professionally taken photograph. And they would say, it's blurry. There's no real center to it. There's no real focus to it. And so everything that they said was put into a database with their description. So 4 different events, 20 photographs each. That was another part of the story or the research. So all of the photographs, we ended up getting people to talk about them. The people that we recruited, we only recruited them based on age and gender. And after we were through with that, we did ask some other questions, and we found out about educational background, and within the group, we had a few students. This gentleman was, he had just come to the United States. He was a graduate student or a PhD student in mathematics. We had a couple of construction workers. We had 2 flight attendants. We had people. So it was a broad variety, but they were actually recruited based on their age and gender. So the 5th part of this study were the exit interviews, which I found to be quite revealing. The captions that appeared with all the photographs that were shown appeared as they had originally been published, including the photographer's name, though we excluded the publication name. And it was really interesting to see how much of the caption was read, whether or not people would go back and forth between the caption and the subject. These are a few of the photographs that came up. So at the end of this time of looking at the images, after we had gone through all of these elements, I asked people what photographs stood out in their memory. And so that was an interesting element too. And I went back to check to see if they had spent more time on those images than others. I'm going through these rather quickly, but some people spent a lot of time on these images. And I'll tell you at the end of this about the images that were most memorable. So again, we did this particular study at the time that the Sun-Times had just laid off almost all of their photographers. And I gathered some materials. You know, the Stanley Cup was an event that happened just after this happened. And if you can see the differences in the way that the 2 major publications covered this event. It was also at the same time that Sports Illustrated had most of their photographers who had been on staff revert to a contract basis that changed benefits. And so, I mean, this was, you know, one of those times, very memorable. And unfortunately, we're facing so many more of these times. And of course, it's not that Sports Illustrated isn't relying on fabulous photography, but just the status, the hiring status and the benefit status is different. So let me go over some of the major findings of this particular study, and then maybe I'll take a break and come back in, ask or answer any questions that you might have. And then I'll go back and look at some of the images that were the most memorable and what people said that they valued the most. So in terms of the major findings, out of these 200 images, people spent 50% longer with the professional photographs in the study. So this is looking at all of the variables, all variations of images that came up randomly, and they spent considerably longer with the images that had been taken by a professional. People were able to identify professionally taken photographs 90% of the time. So these were the events where I was saying, you know, what do you suppose the source of these images are? The average time spent looking at professional photographs in the study kind of broke down evenly between faces and captions. Then other elements within the photographs, I actually tallied like everything that was looked at. You know, someone's hand or arm or leg, other parts of a person in the photograph, details in the photograph, something on the wall or a football flying in the air. This is sort of how it kind of broke down. So faces draw a lot of attention. Each of the highest rated photographs in the study was taken by a professional photojournalist. So these are among the highest rated images out of all 200. Professional photos in the study were twice as likely to be shared. People were more inclined to share photographs that we would have categorized as emotional, relatable, interaction between people in a photograph. Social media, or, you know, hey, you've got to see this. That was what we determined was the sharing. This one photograph that was a user-generated photograph, the dog Otto, was the only photograph to make the list of most shared photographs. So go figure. We love dogs, I guess. People were drawn first to faces, even in a very complex image. So when this photograph came up, people's eyes went directly to this gentleman. In our earlier eye track findings, what I found was that if there's not a dominant element on a page or a screen, faces draw attention. So even though one of these photographs is a little bit larger than another, most often the face would go to Mariano Rivera, or to the young boy in the top row to Mariano Rivera, or the woman in the third row. Test subjects showed a lot of interest in interactions between people in a photograph. And in the exit interviews, people often remembered this photograph, and out of the, you know, they might have looked at 150 of the 200 images or 110 of the 200 images. But this one came to mind, and they said, I just wanted to go with these women. I wanted to know what they were talking about and if they were, you know, friends or relatives. So that emotional contact drew a lot of attention. Captions were very well read in the study, and that's one area I want to go back into in this next study to find out why. And I'll tell you why I'm asking this. The longer or better developed a caption, the more likely a photograph would receive attention, even if the photograph was crappy. So here's a crappy photograph and a crappy caption. Here's a photograph that was a user-generated photograph. I thought it was just okay, but a very lengthy caption. And people spent a lot of time with this trying to figure out exactly what the situation was. So the caption is not masterfully written, but people tended to linger on this image and pairing because they wanted to know what was happening, even though neither one would probably rise to a professional quality. So you hear that question in my voice. I have more things that I want to know about captions and photographs.
I think I'm really glad you're going to be looking at that, because I think captions are so important, and thinking about what we put in them and how much information, and, or, you know, is, you know, we always want, is there a quote, and does that really help? And there's so many questions about captions I think people would love to know.
And so often we think, oh, it's because this, and we think that we know. Hopefully with a little more scientific look at this, we can, you know, say, oh, within this, you know, measure of the study, we're able to say this with confidence. People tended to go back and forth between the caption and an image to establish context. So they didn't look at the photograph and then stop and read the caption completely. They would bounce back and forth. Captions in our survey of user-generated photographs tended to be very poorly developed. And, you know, I mean, I think that we all would continue to see things in Instagram that get a lot of likes without a lot of context, or within publications. I love the idea that we would get people to submit photographs. I think that the more that we can go into the context of the storytelling, what's happening and why. For example, here's a beautiful photograph. We're able to see, they tell us the type of lens that it was taken with, but I want to know, does this person do this every day? Did somebody just win a prize? Did they just get an A? How old is the person in the photograph? That context, I think, is really crucial. And the LA Times, even at this point, they were saying that they would call the photographer who submitted that to try to get more information. But I think it's an important part. So, okay. So I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to come back and maybe answer a few questions. Then I'd love to show you some of the context, the most memorable parts of things. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Do you guys have any questions about why we did this or how we did this?
So Noor asks, how did you collect the photos? Did you have specific criteria putting them together?
Well, we did decide that it was within a 6-week period. It was actually within a 5-week period. We took a look at publications and made a list of the publications. Then we gathered those images that were easiest to get. So I think that is something I'd like to look at again as we do this in the next round. It's hard to say that we're going to look at the entire universe that's published within X, Y, or Z, because you have to be able to capture it at a certain point. But we had a couple of people curating and looking and watching for different elements. Some images we weren't able to get a hold of, but they were chosen within that time frame, within those publications, and we were looking for that range of professional and user generated.
So you had to get rights to use this in the research then too?
For an educational purpose, we didn't get formal written rights, but within copyright and fair use, as long as it's part of a study or part of a critical analysis, we didn't, we use these images. They were never published anywhere that was a money-making event, which is part of the copyright and fair use.
So Aaliyah wants to know, how have you used the findings? Are they published? Were they sent to publications? By the way, on the chat, Jenny posted a link to the study for people who want to sort of follow that link.
Oh, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, there are 3 stories with links to a video that was done by Alex Garcia and Mark Anderson, and about the overall study. It was published within NPPA. It was published on the Pointer website, and we did a series of interviews. And then we presented this hundreds of times, actually, at Associated Press managing editors. We presented at South by Southwest, at universities all over, at workshops. And all the materials, if anybody ever wants these, I can send you a package of materials that you could use within your news organization, or I could Skype in. And part of this new study, and I'm going to save some time at the end here because I want to get your ideas on what we should try to, to determine, or what information we should gather. All of this new material will be open as well.
So that kind of goes to Madeline's question of, she's in a newsroom that relies equally on staff photographers and user-generated content. What's the best way to get your research in a pitch to the editors?
Well, I was really pleased at the time that we had APME reaching out to us and different groups. So we had publishers and editors. The white paper kind of articles on the NPPA site are kind of boil it down to like those major findings. And it's the type of thing that, we did a lot. Well, we did some social media. We had a lot of the specific graphics and things that we put out there. This new one will have a major social media component. But again, I'd be really interested if anybody wants me to distill something specifically for your organization. I am so happy to do that. you can reach out to me.
So Deborah Fisher says, this is great information for budget conscious nonprofit organizations on the value of professionally shot photos too. So thank you. And I think that's true. We sort of think of this in a news context, but it's also true in other contexts. Yes.
And definitely after we get through this coronavirus, whatever world we go into, we have a lot of discussion about how we continue to be out there taking photographs, how images are selected, and how we continue to talk about this. So, you know, the group of advisors on this next study, it's all of the NPPA leadership and past NPPA leaders, but also Regina is my advisor, and Al Tompkins at Poynter, and Kenny Irby. And I mean, I would love to have just as many voices in this as we can, with the idea that we'll have these kind of training tools and some hands-on exercises that I don't want it to be like some burdensome thing like, oh, I got this from NPPA and everybody needs to watch it in our newsroom, but more like little bite-sized awareness pieces as well. And I think social media is going to be strong for that. And we've talked about a very short piece videos rather than a 20-minute video about something.
I think I know the answer to this next question, but did you look at the difference between black and white and color photos?
Not necessarily, no. I didn't have the number of them to look at. And at the time, because we were showing things primarily from digital sources, there just weren't the volume of things within that 6-week period. I think we could. Sometimes in my studies, I've done these really fine-tuned, sometimes research gets to be so narrow that it's kind of like, yeah, but what does that mean? But, you know, sometimes I've even looked at, and this was in 2008, maybe, you know, I took a look to see if people had this intuitive swipe to the left or right or up or down. So I tested people looking at photographs on a screen. And it's, you know, at this point, it's kind of like, there was no completely intuitive way of doing it. So sometimes research can be so fine that it's like it may or may not make a difference, but we didn't test that at that time. And maybe we will.
And Helen Sievers wants to know if you've studied the differences among people whose languages are read right to left or those who have dyslexia.
No, haven't. I think that would be fascinating. It might be outside of the specific subject for this. I have worked with the Microsoft reading technology. It is so interesting. They test all sorts of things like that. And I'm doing another round of testing on news presentation and trust. I don't know if we'll become that fine-tuned, but when Microsoft looks at things, they have to look at Arabic and, you know, all the different languages and typography. And so there are some sources. And I would really like to gather up some research so that I can be like a clearinghouse for all those other studies. Might not be part of this particular study, but really interesting.
So Casey Carlson was wondering what the reasoning was behind not including the publication name in the captions. Was that to not influence the idea of quality?
Yeah, exactly. I put in a photographer's name, and I could have gone either way, but it just seemed like if I had it, I was going to. But I didn't want somebody to say, oh, that's from the LA Times, or that's from the Towanda Press, and just infer something that they may or may not know. That was the reason. So, oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, any idea if this has had any effect on photographers getting jobs?
I don't know if I can say that. I'll tell you though that at the different places that we've talked about this, we've had large audiences. And I feel like all we can do is to have as much conversation as possible. And right now, everybody, you know, we're all talking about truth and trust in media. In 2014 and 2015, it was an economic discussion. And now all of a sudden it's economy and all of this other bull crap, you know? So I think I think it's the time to have some strategy for how we put that together. So no, I haven't researched that in particular.
So Aaliyah's wondering how we can get involved in doing research like this.
Well, I'll tell you. At the end of this, and Regina, let's save like 15 minutes at least. I would really love to know, just like you were asking about reading and dyslexia and black and white, I would really love to have a lot of ideas. Like, what is it that you would really be interested in? Not that we'll necessarily be able to do all of those things, but I think the bigger net we put together, the more likely that we're going to have something that's really meaningful. I would love to go ahead. I'm going to share with you some of these comments, and I think that there might even be like a comment in here or two that you guys might write down and want to tell somebody about, and that becomes kind of a reason that we're talking about photojournalism. So each photo cited as the most memorable, because I had everyone look through these images for 1 hour. And then I said, what do you remember most? And they would sit there and think for a few minutes, and they would come up with something that had really that really stood out to them. And every one of those was a professional image. And here are some of the images and what they said. So this photograph of this is the infant's aunt giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The mother is in the white dress. It was a fabulous caption too. People spent a lot of time on this photograph, and you know, some of the comments I've written here, like, my gosh, this told a story. It immediately drew me in. I think we would say that as picture editors and photographers, and I wanted to see if people in the general public also had that way of describing things. One person said about this photograph, I remember the one of the two ladies leaving the dance floor. You could tell they were happy. The picture itself told a good story, not the caption, just the picture itself. The two guys hugging, it captured emotion. It was being in the right place and capturing the photo at exactly the right time. Someone said they remembered the photograph of a girl being happy and young and carefree over this very somber place. It was just a great picture. Somebody else said, the little girl. There's obviously the contrast between life and death. Isn't that a great comment? It was a natural photo that represented some very interesting ideas, and the moment that it captured, it seemed very genuine. It just made me think, wouldn't you love to follow people around and hear them describe the photographs that you guys have taken? This person said, I'm not a sports person at all, but it's a high quality photo catching the moment. The guy being called out on whatever base it was, I remember the emotion in the moment. So they didn't have these in front of them at the time. They were remembering from 20 minutes before or 30 minutes before. This one, someone said, a dramatic human moment, something that can tell the story on its own, something I don't see, like the firefighters getting the bus driver out. Without that picture, we would never have that perspective. To me, it was these interviews that started putting heart to how people valued the images. Somebody remembered this photograph. There was like a split second where she let go of the golf club, and it was crystal clear. It was up close. It caught a big moment. That's the kind of stuff I like to linger over and marvel at. Rich and beautifully colored, technical perfection, clarity of focus. The guy with a flamingo wrapped around his head. It was such a fun, unexpected picture. I really love this comment. So at the time we did this study, there was snow on the ground in Minneapolis, and it was May. I think it was May 1st. This person said the photographer—
Entirely possible.
Yeah. The photographer would have had to had been lying on the ground, and this is what we've been feeling here in Minnesota, ready for spring. And then somebody else said, it's not that this photograph, it's not that it's rare, It's that someone decided to see it. And I think that, you know, should make photojournalists feel really good. You know, I mean, it's not a breaking news crime story, but it's like that choice of seeing. Not sure why this is here in particular in this position, but I thought it was interesting. I've often wondered if an image that is on the edge of things, an image peeking into the frame, drew attention. It was often cited as a distraction. So here's the arm, right? And we always say crop in on the action. I had people who said that that was distracting. And then I could see whether or not they their eyes kept going back to something that was incomplete. Okay, that's probably out of order, but but an observation was, I wish that things were like cropped out because I got distracted by something that wasn't the focus. Sometimes I was like, wait, what's that over there? When it came to the question of quality, people weren't shy when describing things that they didn't like. And so this is from the recorded exit interviews. Everything was transcribed. They said things like, nothing of interest, just the back of heads, just another everyday moment, just someone smiling at the camera, just a crowd shot. It was cropped funny, no story to it, not enough information. Those came up time and time again from the user-generated photographs. When somebody was describing poor quality, they said it was things like TV stations that say, hey, send us pictures from your backyard. Okay, I thought that was funny. Or a few grip and grins and people holding up fish. And admittedly, there was a photograph of a kid holding up a fish that had been published at some point.
I'm surprised they would know the phrase grip and grin, though. I mean, that seems kind of a...
I have no idea. I have all those transcripts. I could tell you who it was. Among the lowest rated photographs, this one was in, it was about the eclipse. And the caption said that people were going in to get glasses for the eclipse. So, you know, wouldn't it have been better to see somebody showing the glasses or, you know, but that was, you know, something that was actually published. Just a bunch of people standing in line. I remember this guy said, I just don't care. I don't know who you are. I don't know what's going on in the game. Doesn't seem newsworthy. Maybe with social media, but news, no. This photograph, the caption said, there had been a boat there. I mean, it would have been this flood water came up too high or something. I looked and looked, but a photo of a dock where a boat floated away isn't much of a photo. Subject is barely in this picture. So when it came to descriptions of the highest quality ratings, people said, it tells me a story versus just capturing a scene. Kismet in terms of the moment. I thought that was nice. Subject matter that has some currency or relevance makes you say, wow, a perspective I might never see. So here are some other selected comments, and then I'll come back. I want to get your ideas for what we do next.
I was going to say, you're coming close to giving yourself time for chats, and we have some more questions. So,
oh, let's do that. Let's kind of go through, because I will be happy to post this, and you guys can see the whole thing. I'll post it as a PDF, and you can just click through. So in summary, people clearly recognized quality. The most memorable photographs were taken by professionals. People said that they equated quality photography with context, emotion, and storytelling. People showed interest in interactions between people in a photograph. People are drawn to real people doing things in real time rather than a posed or static photograph. Good captions seem to really matter for context. Captions with professional images are generally more developed than user-generated images. More time was spent with photographs that had strong context, a genuine moment, interaction, relationships, well-developed captions, rare perspective. So you've got that link, thanks to Jenny. And there are 3 stories that you would take a look at there. You can contact me directly, and I'll customize some information that you could take back to your news group if you wanted to. So
let's do a few questions real quick, and then you can start gathering ideas.
Okay.
So Ben Brewer wants to know, did you see the equipment that professional photographers using impact the professional perception? You know, what are your thoughts on photos taken by professionals using iPhones versus mobile phones? How much is subject driven by composition, moment versus technology and equipment?
It wasn't anything that we tested in this study. As a matter of fact, I mean, although I have my presumption, I have no idea what cameras were used to take those photographs. We could probably all guess, but I didn't record what was used. I would say that you know, being there in the right place at the right time and sourcing and you know, outweighs probably whatever device, but I do think that lens matters, you know, of course.
So Brian Aho asks, as we find people expressing how tired they are at bad news only in news, I'm wondering, would an image showing tragedy or something upsetting me be viewed more than a happy photo, say a team winning this World Series or a Super Bowl? And would they stay longer with the image showing bad news without a caption or with the happier type image?
I think that's a really good question. And, you know, when I've done some other studies, we've done like 30 consecutive days of publication, and we'd have to, you know, it's an investment of time and money. And I always just was afraid that there would be in whatever community, like a serial killer or coronavirus. I mean, so I can't, you know, in a study like this, it's hard to plan for breaking news. But I would guess that if that's the only known photograph of somebody who robbed a bank and they're running away, people might study it longer. But I do not know, I don't have that data. I try to be real careful to say what I think differently than what I know. So that's one of the things I don't know, but I'm making notes here.
Okay, while you're making notes, Mike Zerby wonders, did the caption on the mouth-to-mouth scene say whether or not the victim survived and identify people in it?
It did, both of those things, and the infant did survive.
Were any of those looking at pictures photographers themselves?
No.
Helen Seaver says, I've long been interested in how what we see is influenced by what we have been trained to see, what the results would be if trained artists were compared to those who had little exposure to art and techniques employed in producing an art in any form.
I know, and so, you know, we were pretty careful not to have anyone who was a professional photographer or a journalist. There are times when in one of the other studies that I did, I had 600 readers come in to look at that day's paper. And I had to make sure that they had not looked at the paper in print or online that day at all. And if they had, I would just say, I'm sorry, but I can't have you do the study. So within the, you know, research confines, you try to keep it pretty strict. I think that would be interesting.
Tom Nelson says, for the next study, will you include a category of fake news to gauge the response of viewers to this material, or is that a completely separate project?
I don't know. We talked about, somebody else brought up whether or not something had been manipulated and how easy it would be to tell. And there's such a range of manipulation. I mean, I think that's perhaps on the table. I would hate to further anything that would like put anything fake in front of anybody in a journalistic setting, but it's something that we've talked about. If you've got some thoughts on that, I would love to hear more.
Madeline says, a big danger in this Instagram era, I think, is when we start to make art for each other as professionals instead of our community. Is that something that's considered in your research?
I think we would still be discussing things that would be published in a news context, even if it's for a nonprofit, like if it's coverage of an event. Or we haven't talked about photo illustration, and that would get into, you know, manipulated pixels, and I don't know that that's going to be a part of this, because I think we're looking at news.
So Noor asked if you were able to see what type of photo, so breaking news, sports, et cetera, made a difference. Would that be something to track next time?
We did do that, and it was a negligible amount. I took that slide out just because I was trying to simplify this, and because I didn't have like equal numbers. I had slightly more news photographs than business photographs, but I did try to do that. But it could be that we would try to categorize that. That would be interesting. We're also looking potentially at video, at news video as part of this study.
Other questions or suggestions for Sarah? What areas would you like to see? Go ahead and throw that in the Q&A or the chat, and she's interested.
Some of our other study has looked at people reading online or looking at anything online, what the bailout point is, like at what point will people either dig in or stop reading. And in terms of interactive things with graphics or reading text, there was this bailout point of about 78 seconds. That was the average out of everybody I looked at, past which they would either dive in or just stop. And Regina, I've heard you say this many times. When it comes to video, what's your guideline for that?
You know, it's so interesting. It's changed so significantly. It used to be it was hard to get people go past a minute. Now the stats say people go a long time, but that's really heavily influenced by, are they watching like Netflix? You know, and so the numbers are a lot harder to parse apart than they used to be. So
That's
it's
why I'd like to test,
hard to tell.
I'd like to test news videos in kind of a controlled setting, but a range of them with age and gender to see if there's kind of a difference. And even the contextual ideas of how much is left, if people can see that quickly, how much is left, or, you know. So that might be
David
fun.
Marks is asking, and I think you guys did look at this before, but has there been any kind of attention comparison of articles with photos versus articles without photos?
Yeah, an article online or in print that has any sort of visual is how we got a lot more attention than something without. We found, I have a lot of findings. I've got a little book actually about all the findings comparing broadsheet to tabloid to online. So content with an image gets a lot more attention. It draws attention and it holds readers' attention and it helps them to understand and remember. They maintain that a little bit longer.
Okay, so last call. Anybody got a suggestion for what you'd like to see them take a look at next time?
It's kind of nerdy goodness. I'm going to post in the chat my email address, and I would love to hear from anybody who would be interested. And the best one for me is saraquinnmedia@gmail.com. And just know that we're going to start this study for NPPA and Reynolds in June. It's going to run for 8 months.
Okay, so Casey has a comment here. You mentioned that you measured age groups earlier, those who've been born into digital versus those who are older and more print focused. I'd be curious to see what images make more of an impact based on age group.
I found a slight difference in the quickness with which a younger person in that younger group would take a look and then move on to another image. They tended to look at a slightly higher number of images within that time frame. And older people, it wasn't dramatic. It was nothing dramatic, but older people tended to linger a little bit longer on the photographs and captions.
Okay, well, we will. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate you doing this. This was great. We appreciate you jumping in at the last minute and sharing this with us, but it's awesome and really fascinating stuff. And I know she means it when she says get a hold of her. So everybody, thank you for attending. We're going to take a brief break and then we will be back with Stephanie Sinclair. So join us. Thanks, you guys.
All right, thank you.